Welcome to the Midlife Catalyst podcast, a place where ordinary people share extraordinary stories. I connected with today's guest through social media as I was sharing parts of my story of grief and sobriety. We discovered we had a lot in common, and I find her to be easy to talk to and relatable, all excellent traits of a coach. After speaking with her a couple of times, I knew Whitney Combs was someone I wanted on my podcast as a recurring guest. Whitney is a big believer that everyone has within themselves the capacity for change. She believes that every one of us knows what we need to do in order to heal and live our best possible lives. She sees her work as walking beside her clients, asking provocative questions, and offering encouragement and accountability so that they can uncover their own personal path toward health and wellness. So Whitney will kick us off to start the year.
I have a lot of questions just based on your intro alone. Whitney Combs is a nationally board certified health and wellness coach specializing in addiction and recovery. She lives in Tampa, Florida with her husband, 3 children, 2 cats, and a very sweet yellow Labradoodle. Whitney started her professional career as a physician assistant. In early 2017, Whitney got sober and made a decision to move away from the clinical realm and into the coaching world so that she would have the ability to work more holistically with the people she serves. She earned a coaching credential and certification from the National Society of Health Coaches in 2017, an additional certification from Well Coaches in 2021, and her National Board for Health and Wellness Coaching board certification for coaching in 2022. I'm pausing there. Start in telling about making the transition from physician assistant to the coaching world and your why for doing that. Because I'm obviously very interested in people who decide to make pretty big life changes, and that is one.
It was a big life change. Like you said, started in 2004 as a clinician, as a PA, and I was working in neurology and specializing in seizures and sleep disorders. I was in a hospital setting and I got pregnant with my firstborn. The job was very demanding on my feet, long hours, really rough. So I knew I needed to do something a little bit different. That was in 2009, maybe. I transitioned to PA education. I found a position on faculty at a physician assistant, a master's level PA program, and went there to teach neurology and women's health and some psychiatry. And I was also the clinical director or the associate director of clinical education. I helped the students find their clinical placement. I was developing relationships with doctors and hospitals and putting the students in their clinical rotations. The job was great. I loved it. I loved teaching. I loved mentoring students. That was something that I was really passionate about and really good at. The expectation in that position became that I needed to research and publish, that I needed to get back into clinical work in order to stay relevant, both of which I completely understood, but it just wasn't where we was. In 2016, kind of in conjunction with a year where my drinking just went off the rails, I decided to leave the PA realm completely. I stepped away from the job initially with the intention of becoming a children's yoga teacher. I had my adult teaching certification and I got an additional children's certification and went into some preschools to teach children's yoga and discovered very quickly that while I loved my preschoolers, I did not love other people's preschoolers. It was more about, I need to go to the bathroom, help me get my shoes off, and all of which was fine, just not what I wanted to be doing. The drinking story kind of dovetails into this.
Right.
Like I said, in 2016, my drinking just went off the rails. I was always pretty dysfunctional with my drinking, although I didn't know it. I was one of those people who never knew if I was going to have 2 or 10. I did a lot of binge drinking and a lot of blacking out, but I kind of thought it was normal because it was just the culture of the people that I surrounded myself with. But things got pretty dark that year. That weekend drinking turned into daily drinking, in part because the job was stressful, in part because I was raising 4 young children in a blended family. And I started drinking every night, at least a bottle of wine, sometimes 2, sometimes more. And the weekend drinking, the binge drinking got really out of control and pretty scary. Just put myself in some pretty scary positions during that year. In the midst of the job transition, I decided that if I was going to figure out the next phase of my life, I had to stop drinking. Like, that was somewhere in the back of my mind. It wasn't really my driving, motivating factor. That driving factor for me was that I was just sick of being sick, like just exhausted and tired of waking up hungover. Certainly in the back of my mind, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to figure out the next thing if I kept drinking. I quit January 2nd, 2017. I make it sound real easy, and it was not real easy. It was real hard. But that was my last day of drinking was January 1st of 2017.
Interesting. For me personally, 2016 was also when my drinking massively changed. It took me 4 more years to figure that out. Like, you got it together pretty quickly. Yeah, 2016 definitely was a rough year. And that transition from weekend binge to every night and drinking by myself, that increased significantly. 2016, January 2nd of 2017, which is coming up. Congratulations. Is that
Years.
That's huge. That is huge. How did you get sober? Did you use a program? What did that look like for you?
When I had that last day of drinking on January 1st, what happened that day was that my husband took the kids to the pool, which you can do in Florida in January. I had a cold that I'd been kind of trying to recover from. We hadn't gone out New Year's Eve or anything, but he took the kids to the pool, and I was given time and energy, or time and space, to rest, recuperate, and try to get well. Instead of laying in bed and healing, I sat on the back porch and drank 2 bottles of wine. Nothing terrible happened that night, but I woke up the next morning just like absolutely sick of my own bullshit and knew that something had to change. So I laid in bed that morning, tears streaming down my face, computer in my lap. I searched yoga and recovery because I was really into yoga at the time, still am, but really into yoga at the time. Found Holly Whitaker's Hip Sobriety, which was a group coaching program, an 8-week group coaching program that helped women renegotiate their relationship with alcohol. Sadly, it's no longer in existence, but it was a very comprehensive program that guided me to all the tools and all the practices that I needed to stay sober. Because I was ready at the time, I just threw everything I had at it. I started journaling and meditating and throwing tarot cards, moving my body and eating nutritious food and hydrate. I mean, just all the things. It was hard. It was a lot of work. I was very fortunate because at the time I was not working. I mean, I was raising 4 kids, but I wasn't working outside the home. I was really able to kind of consider that my full-time job. And I did. I mean, I really, nothing got as much attention as my recovery for months. Not my husband, my kids, not the housework, not anything. I just spent that time regaining control of my life because my life had gotten so grossly out of control on the inside. On the outside, everything was together.
Yeah.
But on the inside, I was just dying. It was Holly's program really that got me through and guided me toward sobriety.
So, speaking of Holly, shortly thereafter, you went to work for Tempest, building curriculum for that organization for people not in the sober world or familiar with different recovery platforms outside of traditional AA or inpatient. Tempest, Hip Sobriety, the Luckiest Club are all different forms of sobriety, different organizations that really do sobriety differently, especially for women, for marginalized groups. I got sober using the Luckiest Club, which is TLC, which is Laura McCown's program, and Holly and Laura had a podcast called Home. Way before I ever thought about this, they both wrote books. I stumbled upon them both January of 2020. Their lives are pretty parallel and then went different directions for different reasons. Anyone could go back and listen to any of those old podcasts and still gain a lot from them. Yes. When, we reached out and we started swapping stories and comparing backgrounds, as soon as you said Tempest, I was like, okay, you definitely not just are you credentialed coaching wise, but you're also credentialed because that, in my mind, is one of the top tier programs. Knowing you design courses and curriculum just really impacted me a lot. So talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, the first thing I'll say is that Tempest doesn't exist anymore. It was bought out by a different company. After I finished Hip Sobriety School with Holly, I absolutely fell in love with her and her method, and the way she looks at sobriety and recovery. I stayed in touch with her. I really initially just started hounding her, like, please help me. I think I want to be a coach in this area. Help me figure out how to do that. And she was so gracious and really did help as we continued our professional relationship and developed into a friendship. And she started Tempest. She hired me as the third employee to build out the coaching program. I came on board there late 2017 to build their one-on-one coaching program, because I think one of the things that was missing in Holly's initial iteration in Hip Sobriety School was that one-on-one support, because she was only one person, right? Like, she had to bring cohorts of people through the school and she didn't have staff that could provide that one-on-one support. So we started building that program at Tempest, and I had one teeny little coaching certification when I started there, and began with one other woman who is an amazing coach as well, Andrea Shaw. She and I started coaching, I think, 6 people to begin with. And we worked together, Holly and Andrea and I worked together to build curriculum for the one-on-one program. By the time I left Tempest, which was before Tempest was bought out, but by the time I left, I was managing a team of 12 to 15 coaches, and we were serving hundreds of women a month. It was just amazing how it grew. It was still a pretty small part of the bigger Tempest picture. I really loved my time there. I still think of it as just it was a continuation of what saved my life. And continuing that work and really still continuing this work is a big part of what keeps me sober. I'm so grateful for that.
That's what a lot of people don't understand is 7, almost 8 years in, you're still doing work. You don't stop. What does your sobriety structure look like now? What does a day in the life, a week in the life look like for you?
You make such a good point that you have to keep working at this. The work that we do to stay sober is really work that every human should be doing. I don't think of it as sobriety work. I think of it as the work I have to do to show up authentically, to be my best self, to be vulnerable and effective as a human being. I have non-negotiables that are things I have to do every week to be that person. And they shift sometimes. Right now, my non-negotiables are a morning routine where I get up stupid early, like 4:30, 4. I have journaling. I have 3 different journals to write in. So I have a regular journal, I have a prayer journal, and I have a tarot journal. I do my journaling in each of those. I move my body. My husband and I do yoga together 3 days a week. I Peloton 3 days a week. I do a meditation. That mindfulness piece in there that's real important. Throughout the day, I'm just real careful with my energy. If I feel myself getting too jacked up, I know that I don't have a sledgehammer at the end of the day that some people have. Like, I cannot go to the refrigerator and grab a bottle of wine. So instead of letting myself get to a 10, I have to stay at a 4. If I feel myself creeping up to a 6 or 7, I stop and I take a breath break, or I take a walk around the block, or I listen to one of my favorite songs, something to recalibrate my nervous system. That's that's one thing that I think is so important, because so much of this work is regulating your nervous system and figuring out how to keep yourself from the 10 and keep yourself at a 3 or 4. And it's something you have to be conscious about, like all day, every day. It sounds like I say that and then it sounds like a slog, and it's really not. It feels like a privilege to be able to engage in this kind of work and to be able to, introspect enough to know when I need to stop and when I need to slow down. That's my day in the life.
I like what you said about the energy. I think it's an energy management for me versus time management. It's not so much managing your schedule, but it's managing those emotions around certain events and activities, and then how you deregulate and then re-engage is really important. When I was in more of the 9 to 5 world of having those back to back to back meetings was completely zapping. If people have the ability to better schedule those, not so much because of time, but the energy is really important. I say I can only do 2 things a day as far as events, especially this time of year. Okay, I'm going to go to this brunch and then this party, but we're not going to throw something in the middle of the day, like a book club, because it zaps too much of my energy and capacity. I've got to recharge.
100%.
So I loved you talking about the 3 different journals, because I currently have 3 different ones going and I have thoughts all over the place. Do you have, it sounded like a journal dedicated to a certain event. What does your journaling practice look like? Is it part of morning, and do you journal in all 3 in the morning? What does that look like?
It's part of my morning, and I do all 3 in the morning. My first journal is just a blank, and is not an everyday one. It's a when I wake up and my head is full of shit kind of journal. I do Julia Cameron's morning pages, just a brain dump of everything that's going through my head, everything I can think of to say. I try to not stop writing until I've filled up a few pages, and I just go, 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 go. And that's a nice way of clearing the slate for the day. So you can start with a clean slate. And then my prayer journal is fairly new to me. I'm not a very religious person, although we do go to church on Sundays. We have done since my oldest passed away in 2023. We started going back to church, but it's not. I don't know. There are challenges in the church that I haven't figured out quite how to negotiate. I don't believe everything that is taught in a traditional church setting, but I do believe in the power of prayer, meditation, and thoughtful reflection. I sought out a prayer journal that I love. It just asks you to share what's on your mind, to say what you're thankful for, to say what you're worried about, and to say what you need. And people that you're praying for. That's a nice little thing that I had never done in a journal before, was think in the morning about other people's needs. And then my tarot journal, also a structured journal, asks me a few questions. It asks me gratitudes, which I think gratitudes are great. They're important. They work wonderfully for some people. So gratitudes, again, something I'm proud of, and a couple things I'm manifesting, which is fun to play with. And then I draw a tarot card every day with thinking of a different question in mind. Like if I have an event that I have to move through, I'll draw a tarot card to ask what kind of energy I should embody to move through that event. And really, tarot for me is just a tool for self-inquiry and self-discovery. The cards are a springboard for some emotional exploration. I don't believe they tell the future. I don't really lean on them heavily for anything other than just that introspection piece. All done in the morning. I go to bed really early, like really, really early.
Right.
Get all that in.
Yeah. Well, and your mind's spent. You're done, Do you do a night wind down type routine?
I don't really anymore. I did in the beginning. I definitely had an evening routine. Because I had 4 young kids, it was hard to find a lot of time. But my evening routine in the beginning was to get a cup of hot tea, get a square of dark chocolate, and I sat in my special place on the couch and basically told my kids, like, no questions, no comments for 10 minutes. This is my time. And I loved that no questions, no comments. I used that all the time as my kids were growing up. We'd be in the car and everybody was asking 1,000 things. I'd be like, no questions, no comments. They knew what that meant. But now my evenings really, we eat dinner as a family, and my teenagers are rarely there. But anyway, my youngest and my husband and I eat dinner, and I'll watch some TV to kind of wind down. And then I have my skincare and my teeth routine that I do that signals to my brain, okay, it's time for bed. But nothing fancy at night. I don't take baths very often anymore. I took like a million baths in the beginning of sobriety.
I lived in the bathtub. I would lived just submerged. Recently, I'd gone without a bathtub for like 6 months. The place I'm in now has a very nice bathtub, and I have to keep myself from being in there too often, but I really miss that. Yeah.
Do you have Lush where you are? The bath products?
Blush. Okay.
They have the best smelling bath bombs. They aren't cheap, so I don't get them very often. They have bath bombs and like different soaps that are bubble bars. Oh my God. Yeah, no, it's the best place.
Okay. I'll have to check into this because I will say the last rec you gave me, which was the Day One app for trying to get organized, I use regularly. Your recommendations are always well received for me.
And I forgot I was using that Day One app as my journal, like as my brain dump journal for a while. And I've kind of gotten back to pen and paper in the last couple of weeks. But that Day One app is really, really good. And you can put pictures on it. And no, I love that app.
I do too. It's been super helpful as I've been in transition or out and about, can jot something in it. It's great. Talk about your family, which you've mentioned. What was their reaction to you getting sober? And what has that support looked like from them?
Yeah. So my husband was certainly concerned about my drinking. But what was interesting is that he never nagged me about it. He never told me I needed to stop or else. But so when I stopped, it was really all self-imposed. It was all from me. But he was so grateful and still is so grateful for my sobriety because the way I was drinking was just chaotic. You know, I mean, he would beg me to come home from parties and I would just say, no, I'm staying here. I want to keep drinking. And so his reaction, incredibly supportive. He stopped drinking with me for several years. He drinks a little bit now. Like we'll go out and he'll have a couple drinks and that's no big, I'll have mocktails, no big deal. But he was and is just incredibly supportive. He understands that I have to monitor my energy pretty carefully. And he's really good about stepping in and helping out with whatever, cooking dinner if I just can't do it, or washing up after dinner if I'm done, whatever I need. He's really right there. My kids were young. I mean, they were youngish. They were like late middle or late elementary, early middle. My older three were, and then my youngest, she was 4-ish, so she doesn't remember anything. And even my older kids, when I talk to them now about my drinking, their response is that they don't really remember much of me being drunk or drinking a lot, except that sometimes I would come into their room at night and be kind of sloppy and lovey on them, you know, just in that sloppy way and kind of whatever, gooey lovey. They don't remember it as something that needed to happen. They are very supportive now. It's largely a non-issue for them, really. But I will say my oldest stepdaughter, we have a blended family, ended up struggling with addiction mightily after I got sober. In 2020, she started to spiral into the heavy addiction with alcohol and drugs, and actually ended up passing away in April of 2023 from a fentanyl overdose. So we have dealt with that in our family, and certainly the kids were old enough at that point to be very affected by Caitlin's addiction. It was challenging. It was challenging to navigate that as a sober person too. I remember the first time she came home very drunk, and it was the first time I think I had really seen somebody close to me drinking heavily since I got sober, and it was just like a gut punch. There were a lot of gut punches, but that was the first one.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
You guys have been a lot to endure, overcome, and continue moving forward with doing great things. What keeps you going?
You know, I think there are a lot of things that keep me going. I think first myself and the relationship that I have developed with myself since I stopped drinking. I've gone from self-loathing to self-love. It's important to me that I show up aligned with my values, with who I want to be and how I want to show up. That keeps me sober because I don't want to be that girl that I was in 2016. I love that girl and I hold her, but I don't want to ever go back there again. Then I think family too, for sure. I want to role model for my kids. I've got two other teenage kids that are, one just went to college and one is a senior in high school. I want them to see that they don't have to drink. I don't demonize alcohol in the house at all because I know that they're going to explore and find their own relationship with alcohol. But I do want them to see that you can move through life without drinking, despite what the media tells you, despite what you see on TV. You can move through life without drinking, and it can be beautiful and fulfilling and fun and all the things. You don't need alcohol. Those are probably the two biggest things that keep me sober.
You talked about the girl from 2016. Did you do any sort of a goodbye letter, or what? Did you have any ritual or practice around releasing that girl in that version?
That's an interesting question. No, I didn't. I never did that. Although I do have clients sometimes that I tell to write goodbye letters to alcohol because I think it's a very valuable practice, not something that I engaged with. Hear a lot these days about inner child work, which I think is great. I suck at it though, because I don't have great memories. I don't have great memories, period. For whatever reason, I just don't remember things all that well. And I don't remember my childhood. I had a great childhood by all accounts, but I don't really remember specifics from it. I even have trouble kind of remembering that girl from 2016 and how she felt. I remember some of the horrible things she did. I don't really remember how she felt. So when people are like, imagine your inner child, I'm like, I don't think I have one. I mean, I'm sure I have one, but I can't access her. I don't know if I have some psychological block against it or what. But no, I haven't written her a letter, but I might. I mean, it seems like a good thing to do.
I know. I know. A lot of people in my group did, and it just wasn't something I've journaled about, feelings and places I didn't want to go back to, but
never specific.
what was your family's reaction to you moving into private coaching? Because that too is a pretty big life change of steady traditional job with benefits and weekly paycheck, or however that income looks like, to the realm of you're just hoping to get some clients. Talk about that, the decision to do that, but also how you've managed, because I know, myself included, but also my coaching group, there's a lot of fear around making these transitions financially and family responsibility wise.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel like I fell into it because I was working at Tempest, steady job, benefits, steady income. I made a decision at one point when leadership changed there. Holly stepped away, and I made a decision because the new leadership didn't feel as aligned for me. I made a decision to step away. So initially, my plan was to do coaching in another corporation. I was hired by a company to build a coaching program there. I was working, I don't know, 25, 30 hours a week. So steady income, but they did not put any resources into marketing that program. I actually still manage that program on the side for about 5 hours a week, but I don't love it because it's not recovery related. It's coaching, just general coaching. And it's not where my heart is. As time went on and the hours at that other company dwindled, it became apparent I was going to have to do something else because I was not getting enough hours at that company. I started doing some consulting for other coaches, doing some instructional design stuff. That none of that really took off. My husband and I cut down and we were like, well, let's see what it's going to be like to go out on your own. And to even say we sat down maybe isn't fair because I don't remember ever sitting down and having a conversation about it. There were many conversations about what it was going to look like. I'm fortunate enough that he's an engineer and he's been in the same job, I think, for 30 years. And he is very well respected there and does well there. Not enough to hold us completely, but enough that I don't have to earn a full-time salary to keep our family afloat. So I'm very, very fortunate in that regard. And he is incredibly supportive. We keep real close tabs on our finances and we have conversations once a month where we come together and is this working? Is this not working? What do we need to do different? What do we have that we can invest in my business? It's kind of ongoing conversations, and the kids, they don't care.
For me, it's super important to make a point, because a lot of times people are like, well, you're single, you don't have kids, you don't have that responsibility, so you can take these chances. So I want to point out, here's someone with a family, 4 kids, that has made some pretty big, significant life changes, really to model for your kids to go after what you want in life and the best version of you to present that for them. I like to have some different perspectives of the life change of, yes, but I'm also the sole provider. If things fail, well, it is just me. But for you, we're a whole group here.
Yeah.
Of accountability. You have talked about some of my favorite words being non-negotiables and values, but also talk about you have some workshops coming up, one being around your purpose and your why. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I'm doing a workshop January 19th on writing your why. It's one of the first exercises I do with clients in my private practice, is to really figure out and articulate a clear and compelling statement of your motivation, of why you're ready to be done drinking. I take people through a bit of a process to figure that out. The first part of that process is a tool that I use to explore ambivalence around drinking, because when we come to this so often, there is this part of us that knows we need to be done, knows it's not good for us. And then there's this other part that's like, yeah, but it helps me. I socialize better. It fights boredom. It does all these things for me. So there's that ambivalence that comes up. The first step is to really explore that, because the research tells us that just the act of exploring the ambivalence, even if we don't resolve it, helps us to find a resolution. We do a decisional balance to help explore ambivalence, and then a values exercise I walk people through and figure out what are the 3, 4, 5 things that are of value to you, that you value the most. How do you want to show up in this world? We explore those things, get those written out, and then a couple more steps of talking about what was painful about drinking, what was hard about that, and then imagining a life where you're not drinking and what's good about that. And we take all of those pieces and put them together, distill them into this statement of why you're ready to be done drinking. It becomes a tool to use, because if you have a clear, concise, compelling statement, you can use it when you're in craving. I encourage folks to put it in a note on their phone, so it's always, always with them. If they find themselves really wanting to drink, pull that out, read it. And if it's not enough to make you pause, then you need to rewrite it. It doesn't have enough teeth. That workshop is really designed to help people go through that process and land on that motivation.
Is this in person, virtual?
Zoom.
Zoom? Okay.
Zoom, just like everything after the pandemic, it's all Zoom now. No, I've done some in-person workshops too, but I decided to do this one on Zoom. I think it lends itself well to to online, delivery. I think it'll be fun to hear people interact with from all over the place and, to talk about their own reasons that they're ready to be done and to share those things. It will be interactive to the extent that people want to.
I do think Zoom helps relieve a little bit of the pressure and anxiety for someone just starting. Control and decide how much of yourself you share and put out there. But I also want to say I use that exercise, something similar, in a lot of leadership coaching. So even if sobriety or quitting alcohol isn't the thing they need to stop, that there's still value in that exercise. I think there's absolutely still value in crafting your why in whatever it is you're doing, especially January as we're getting into New Year, New Year's resolutions, intentions, goals, habits, all of those things. When people don't drill down as you do to the purpose and reason, that's why those things fail. You're done by the end of January. You've got to have that clear statement.
It's foundation.
It's for anything, any change you want to make, any habit you want to build upon. So super important. Then you also have another workshop, Sober Summit.
Yes, the Sober Summit is coming up on It is a group of coaches put together by a woman named Anne-Marie Cribben of Thirsty for Wonder. She has pulled together a really interesting group of people to come and present things that are sobriety related. I'm actually doing a talk on grief in sobriety. I will talk a little bit about Caitlin and my journey with losing her. I also lost another really close friend fairly recently within the last year. So there's been that grief that I have had to navigate. And then I think there's just a lot of grief in sobriety in general. We're grieving the loss of this friend that helped us through lots of different things. We're grieving the loss of who we used to be as drinkers. We're grieving the loss of relationships that almost inevitably change and shift as you change and shift. So there's a lot of grief that we have to address in sobriety. This talks a little bit about the grief and then talks about some ways to help manage that.
Outstanding. Is that also Zoom?
That is also Zoom. Yes, and it's free.
Then I will get all of those linked in for people to be able to go and find. And you've been through a lot.
It has been in 8 years. There are certainly little things along the way that have, shaped my journey and shaped kind of the person that I'm still becoming, because I think we all are continuing to become as we grow.
Well, I appreciate you sharing your journey with us because that's super helpful. I think the power of hearing other people's stories and that no two people recover the same and have vastly different experiences but can still end up in the same space and place as we did is pretty remarkable. You talked about personal development. Do you have a favorite personal development book, a go-to book or author?
My go-tos for early sobriety, and this is kind of a different point, are This Naked Mind by Annie Grace and Quit Like a Woman, Holly Whitaker's book. Those are the two of the books that I recommend very early on in coaching. Personally, I'll read any personal development book, but when I'm needing to dig into something, Pema Chodron and Eckhart Tolle are my go-tos. There's just something very comforting about the way that they view the world and their writing. So that's where I gravitate to, and to Tara Brach as well. She has a couple books, but also a lot of podcasts and a lot of meditations that are really good. Those are my 3 go-tos.
Great. All good. What about a song? Do you have a go-to song?
Absolutely do. So my favorite artist right now is Jason Isbell. And he is, I think, 12. I may be saying it wrong, but I think he's 12 years sober. I've seen him in concert many times. I have tickets to see him twice next year already. He has a song called It Gets Easier. He talks about how not drinking gets easier, but it never gets easy. You know, when I first listened to it, I was kind of like, well, what? It never gets easy. Damn it. I need it to get easy.
Doing this.
Right. But then the more I listen to it, the more I think about it, the more I kind of live this life. I'm glad it doesn't get easy. Like, my sobriety is hard won. Still challenging to go out with a group of people who are all drinking. And it's not challenging in a way that keeps me home, but it's challenging in a way that like makes me feel proud that I can move through a night without a drink in my hand. I don't have to act a fool.
Right.
I can stand in my integrity and still have fun and still enjoy people. So, yeah, it gets easier, but it never gets easy. And thank God for that.
I've got a new song to add to my playlist. I am finding more and more, I do not care to be around people drinking. It doesn't bother me. I just don't have the capacity or the energy for it anymore. For a while I did, because I didn't want to miss that social aspect or a trip or a concert or whatever it was. And now I'm like, I don't even care. I don't want to be around. You said integrity, which is one of my core values. What are your core values?
I usually keep them actually in a Post-it on my desk. I redo them fairly frequently because I feel like they shift based on who I am and how I'm showing up in a given season of life. The two core values that always stick with me are kindness. Like, I really think that we just need to move through the world and be kinder to each other and give each other grace and space and understand that everybody's going through something, and it doesn't do me any good to be a jerk about how somebody else is showing up. So kindness and honesty, that honesty piece, I was not able to live out when I was drinking. I was not being honest with myself. I was not being honest with the people around me. I was lying and sneaking and hiding. And so that has become very, very important to me as I've gone on this journey for the past 8 years. And I really, really work at just being very honest in all my dealings with myself and with the people around me.
I love the honesty with self. An aha several years ago from a Dax Shepard podcast. When you stop being honest in your journaling, not with other people, with yourself, is kind of that start. He was talking about the start to his relapse with pink pills. And it was a huge aha for me. I've always kept that in my mind of honesty isn't just with other people, it's also with yourself.
Yeah. And when I stop being honest in therapy, because that's kind of being honest with myself, that is a big red flag to me. If I'm not telling my therapist everything, I'm like, oh, something's going on here. We need to examine that. I completely agree.
Are you a coffee drinker? And if so, how do you take your coffee?
Light and sweet. I love creamer. So coffee is my vehicle for creamer.
Okay.
Right now, my favorite is a coconut creamer that my daughter loves and turned me on to. I drink coffee. I try not to drink it first thing in the morning. I start my morning with lemon water, and then I move to a cup of decaf, and I try not to have caffeine until I've been up for at least an hour or so. It helps me not have that mid-afternoon slump, you know? So, but yes, definitely a coffee drinker.
I got into a practice for a very short period of time of having water first and then, greens, whatever my supplements are, that 60 minutes before coffee upon waking. And it was the best I felt really ever. And I've totally gotten out of that because currently coffee is getting me out of bed to go get the coffee. But there's a lot of value and worth in waiting on that and the science and research to show it. So good for you. Anything else that you want to talk about?
For people in early sobriety, the most important things are to find connection and support. and to find a place where you can say the things you need to say. Like we've been talking about truth and honesty, and there needs to be a place where you can be honest, whether that's your journal, your therapist, a meeting, a coach, a friend, parent, somebody, some place where you can share what's going on with you, finding connection, finding other people who are experiencing similar things. And that can be meetings, it can be finding a sober friend, it can be even friends and family who aren't sober but are supportive of your journey can provide some of that connection. But I do think that that's important. And then, of course, I'm partial to coaching, and I think coaching is very, very valuable in early sobriety. Just finding that support and connection, I think, is really important.
Absolutely. I tried to do it many times, as many January journals and resolutions will show, to quit drinking, stop drinking, cut out drinking, and you can't do it alone. Once I stopped trying to do those things in January and then giving up when, it went off the rails rather than getting back on track. That's why I'm not a huge proponent of dry January, but that's another podcast that we can talk about that another time, because you can get dry any month and anytime you want. And how many ever days you have, I think that's time towards your ultimate goal. So don't throw those away. As someone that did dry January and hit 18 days or 25 out of 30 days, those are great stepping stones. But until I found community and connection and a group, it was never going to last. Just drying out. That's all that was. That was not actual sobriety and doing all the fun stuff as far as digging into those emotions and the why. People can find you at whitneycombs.com.
Yeah.
And also Whitney Combs. And then I will say you have a great article on Substack, which of course I'm a huge proponent of, the Stack. So link that here in the notes, because I thought it was a super beneficial article for those looking to get through the holidays sober.
Thank you. Thank you. That was fun to write. I feel a little out there. It was a very honest story about my last Christmas of drinking. And so I told my mom this morning, I'm like, I feel a little exposed, but it's so important. Like, we have to tell our stories. Helps us heal, gives other people permission to tell their story. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. There is that vulnerability hangover that
Yeah.
comes for a bit, and then you're like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Why don't I do this more often? And then I go through the whole cycle again of working myself up, overstressing, and then I'm like, that wasn't so bad.
100%.
I appreciate your time.
I am beyond grateful to Whitney for taking time to work with me. She has been extraordinarily kind, extending grace, patience, and support to me as I dive into the world of podcasting and all of the technology needed behind the scenes. To find more about the workshops discussed today or to inquire about coaching, check out Whitney Combs Coaching at whitneycombs.com. I'm Amanda, the Midlife Catalyst. You can read more about my journey with midlife change, sobriety, grief, and recovery on my Substack page, wade.substack.com. Be sure to follow the podcast page. Thank you for listening. And as they say in the rooms, keep coming back.